It started on a cold morning when a thin 17-year-old boy named Aaron walked into the courtroom. He was wearing an oversized orange hoodie, the fabric swallowing his slight frame. His hands were shaking, a constant tremor he couldn't control. His eyes looked tired, not angry, not dangerous, just bone-deep tired. As he took his seat, whispers rippled through the gallery. Everyone in that room already knew his name from the news. Aaron Blake, serial offender, arrested again. A familiar headline, a familiar face on the local news channel. But no one in that room knew the real story behind those headlines. They didn't know what happened in the silence of his home, on the unforgiving asphalt of his streets, or deep inside his heart. They didn't know the gnawing fear that was his constant companion, the profound loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. They didn't understand how every decision, every wrong turn, was a desperate attempt to survive, pushing him further and further from the life he once dared to dream of. As the judge entered, a stern figure in black robes, Aaron swallowed hard. The lump in his throat felt like a stone. Today was the day that would decide if he would get a second chance, or disappear behind prison bars for most of his life. The prosecutor began, his voice a sharp, confident weapon. He painted a picture of Aaron as a menace, a hardened criminal who chose a life of crime. He listed the offenses: petty theft, vandalism, truancy, possession. Each word was a nail hammering Aaron's coffin shut. A danger to society, the prosecutor boomed, his gaze sweeping over the jury. A lost cause who has been given chance after chance and has squandered every single one. The jury members looked at Aaron, their faces a mixture of disapproval and pity. They saw the orange hoodie, the shaved head, the rap sheet. They saw the stereotype, not the boy. Aaron felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. He wanted to scream, to tell them they had it all wrong. He wanted to rewind time, back to when he was just a kid with a bright smile and a love for drawing superheroes. He remembered his mom, before she got sick, her laughter filling their small apartment. She would tape his drawings to the fridge, calling him her little Picasso. He'd dream of creating his own comic books, worlds where the good guys always won, where justice was simple and clear. But life wasn't a comic book. His mom's illness was a slow, creeping shadow that consumed everything. The medical bills piled up like mountains, and her once bright eyes grew dim. Aaron, at just 13, became her caretaker. He learned to cook, to clean, to administer her medication. He'd rush home from school, his backpack heavy with books he never had time to open. He'd sit by her bed, reading to her, holding her hand, pretending he wasn't terrified. But the fear was always there, a cold knot in his stomach. His father was a ghost, a name on a birth certificate, long gone. It was just the two of them against the world. Then, she was gone. The silence in the apartment was deafening. The vibrant colors of his superhero drawings seemed to fade to gray. At 14, Aaron was alone. Foster care was a blur of strange houses and stranger faces. Some were kind, but overworked. Others were indifferent. He felt like a package being passed from one address to another, never belonging anywhere. He started skipping school. What was the point? The lessons in the classroom felt disconnected from the harsh realities of his life. He found a different kind of family on the streets. Older kids who seemed to understand. They didn't ask questions about his past. They just saw a kid who needed a place to belong. For the first time since his mom died, he didn't feel completely alone. They taught him how to survive. It started small, stealing a loaf of bread because his stomach ached with hunger. Then, swiping a warm jacket from a department store to fight off the winter chill. Each act was a small compromise, a tiny piece of his soul chipped away. He knew it was wrong, but the alternative, starving, freezing, being utterly alone, seemed so much worse. The first time he was arrested, he was 15. The juvenile detention center was cold and loud. He promised himself he'd never go back. But when he got out, nothing had changed. He was still alone, still homeless. The cycle began again. Each arrest added another layer to the serial offender label. The boy who loved to draw was buried deeper and deeper under the weight of his record. He wasn't a monster. He was a scared kid who made bad choices because he felt he had no good ones. He was a survivor. As the prosecutor rested his case, Aaron's public defender, a young woman named Ms. Evans, stood up. She was the first person in a long time who had looked at him and not just seen a criminal. She had listened to his story, her eyes full of a compassion he had forgotten existed. She hadn't made excuses for his actions, but she had tried to understand them. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice calm but firm. "The prosecution has painted a picture of Aaron Blake as a menace. They have shown you a list of his mistakes. But they haven't shown you Aaron Blake, the person. They have untold you about the boy who cared for his dying mother at the age of 13. They haven't told you about the child who navigated the foster care system alone, a system that too often fails the children it's meant to protect." She walked towards the jury box. "They want you to see a hardened criminal. I want you to see a boy who never had a chance to be a child. A boy who made desperate choices in desperate circumstances. His crimes were not born of malice, but of survival. He stole food because he was hungry. He sought out a group, any group, because he was profoundly lonely. Ms. Evans paused, letting her words sink in. Aaron isn't asking for a free pass. He knows he made mistakes. He is ready to take responsibility. But what he needs is not a cage. A cage will only solidify the identity that the world has tried to force upon him. What he needs is a chance, a real chance, a chance for rehabilitation, for education, for therapy, a chance to find the path back to that boy who dreamed of drawing superheroes. She turned to face the judge. We are not defined solely by our worst moments. Aaron Blake is more than his rap sheet. He is a young man with potential, with a heart that has been broken but not destroyed. Sending him to adult prison would be a tragedy. It would be the final failure of a system that has already failed him time and time again. I urge you, look beyond the orange hoodie, look beyond the headlines. See the boy who is sitting here, terrified but hoping, just hoping, for a second chance to build a life, not just serve a sentence. Tears welled in Aaron's eyes. For the first time, he felt seen. Someone had finally told his story. The judge looked down at him, his expression unreadable. The silence in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Aaron held his breath. The judge cleared his throat, and the world seemed to stop. He spoke, his voice resonating through the room. He acknowledged Aaron's difficult past, the systemic failures, and the compelling arguments from Ms. Evans. But he also spoke of accountability, of the law. Aaron's heart pounded against his ribs. This was it. However, the judge continued. I do not believe that a lengthy sentence in an adult correctional facility would serve the interests of justice, nor the interests of this young man's rehabilitation. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled Aaron's knees, washed over him. The judge sentenced him to a specialized juvenile rehabilitation program, a place with structure, but also with counseling, job training, and education. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was a lifeline. It was a path. As the bailiff led him out, Aaron looked back at Ms. Evans. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on his chest lifted just a little. The road ahead would be long and difficult. He would have to work hard to heal, to learn, and to rebuild. But as he walked out of the courtroom, away from the whispers and the judgment, he didn't just feel tired anymore. Beneath the exhaustion, a tiny, fragile spark of hope had been ignited. The boy who drew superheroes was still in there, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might just have a chance to save himself. This story, while fictional, touches on real issues that many young people face. It's a reminder that behind every headline and statistic, there's a human story. It's a call for empathy and for a justice system that focuses on rehabilitation over punishment, especially for young people who have been failed by the world around them. Other times, she was there, but not really. A body on the couch, too exhausted to move, too tired to speak, too drained to get up and make a meal. And so, Aaron learned the quiet, lonely art of raising himself. There were no bedtime stories, no magical worlds to escape into before sleep. Just the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. There were no warm meals waiting for him after school, just cold cereal or whatever he could find in the sparsely stocked cupboards. No one was there to check his homework, to help him with long division or the names of the planets. And maybe the hardest part, the most deafening silence, was that no one ever asked, "How was your day?" By age 11, school started to feel pointless. He began skipping. It wasn't because he hated learning. He was still that curious kid who loved to see how things worked. But when there's no one to guide you, no one to tell you why it matters, the path of least resistance starts to look awfully inviting. The streets offered a different kind of education, a more immediate one. He found a new family on the corner, a group of older boys who seemed to have it all figured out. They had cash in their pockets, nice sneakers on their feet, and a swagger that commanded respect, or at least, fear. They saw something in Aaron, a quiet kid, observant, quick on his feet. They took him under their wing. His first job was simple: be a lookout. Just stand there, watch for police cars, and whistle if one came near. It was easy. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. He felt useful. He got a $20 bill for a few hours of standing around, more money than he'd ever held in his life. He bought his mom dinner that night. She was too tired to ask where the money came from. She just smiled, a rare, fleeting glimpse of the mother he remembered. That smile was like a drug. He wanted to see it again. The jobs got bigger. From lookout to courier, running small, sealed packages from one block to another. He was told not to ask what was inside. He didn't. The less you knew, the better. The pay got better too. He could buy new clothes, things that didn't have holes or stains. He could help his mom with the electricity bill. He was providing, he was being the man of the house. In his own distorted way, he was fulfilling a role his father had abandoned. His art, his robots, his engineering dreams, they started to fade. The sketchbook gathered dust under his bed. The world of gears and circuits was replaced by the world of street codes and quick cash. He was learning a different kind of engineering, the engineering of survival. How to read a situation, how to spot an undercover cop, how to talk his way out of trouble. These were valuable skills, but they were building a life he never dreamed of. By 15, Aaron was no longer just a kid on the fringe. He was in it. He'd seen things no 15-year-old should see. Fights, deals gone wrong, the desperation in people's eyes. He developed a hard shell, a mask of indifference to protect the scared kids still inside. He was arrested for the first time for shoplifting. It was a stupid mistake, a dare from the older guys. He spent a night in a juvenile detention center. It was cold, loud, and terrifying. But it was also a rite of passage on the street. When he got out, he had more credibility, more street cred. It was a twisted reward system. He dropped out of high school completely. What was the point? The teachers looked at him with a mix of pity and fear. They'd already written him off. In their eyes, he was just another statistic. Another kid from the wrong side of the tracks destined for failure. And in a way, their low expectations became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why try to prove them wrong when it was so much easier to prove them right? His mother found out about his arrest. There was a huge fight, tears, yelling, accusations. "This isn't who you are, Aaron," she cried. But he looked at her, at the exhaustion etched on her face, the worn-out clothes, the constant worry in her eyes, and he yelled back, "What did you expect? You were never here." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, and a part of him broke. He ran out, slamming the door behind him, leaving his mother to cry alone in the apartment he was helping to pay for with dirty money. The spiral continued downward. The small crimes escalated. Petty theft turned into breaking and entering. He was good at it. He was quiet, methodical. He remembered his old engineering sketches, the way systems fit together. He applied that same logic to disabling alarms and picking locks. He was using his brilliant mind for the wrong reasons. It was a perversion of his childhood dream. He was deconstructing people's lives instead of building robots. One night, it all went wrong, a simple burglary. The house was supposed to be empty. They always made sure the house was empty. But they got the schedule wrong. A man came home unexpectedly. There was panic, shouting. One of the older guys with him pulled a weapon. Aaron just froze. He was a thief, not a violent person. He never wanted to hurt anyone. But in that moment, he was part of it. The man was injured, not fatally, but badly. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer, and this time, there was nowhere to run. Sitting in the back of the police car, the blue and red lights flashing across his face, Aaron finally had a moment of clarity. He looked at his hands, the same hands that used to draw incredible machines, now in handcuffs. How did he get here? He traced it all back. The empty apartment, the lonely nights, the hunger, the desire to help his mom, the need to belong. It wasn't one single decision, it was 1,000 tiny compromises. 1,000 steps down a path he never chose, but was pushed onto by circumstance. He was no longer Aaron, the kid who dreamed of being an engineer. He was Aaron, the convicted felon. The world had put a label on him, a label that would be almost impossible to remove. The story of Aaron isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. It shows us how a bright, promising child can be lost, not because of some inherent evil, but because the soil they were planted in was barren. It's a stark reminder that children need more than just food and shelter. They need guidance, they need support. They need someone to ask, "How was your day?" and actually wait for the answer. They need someone to protect their dreams. When we see a young person heading down the wrong path, it's easy to judge, to label them as a bad kid. But maybe we should look deeper. Look at the empty spaces in their lives. The absent parents, the lack of resources, the forgotten dreams. Because behind the tough exterior, there might just be a kid who loved drawing robots. A kid who just needed a little help building a better future. Aaron's story could have been different. And for the countless other Aarons out there, it still can be. Let's think about what we can do, as a community, to be the support they're missing, before it's too late. At 12 years old, Aaron made his first mistake. It wasn't a big, life-altering crime, not in the grand scheme of things. He stole a bag of chips and a drink from a corner store. Why? The simple, painful answer is that he was hungry. He wasn't trying to be a rebel, not trying to prove anything. He just wanted to silence the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. But the shopkeeper caught him, and in that moment, Aaron's world shifted. The shopkeeper didn't see a hungry kid, he saw a thief, and so, he called the police. What happened next is the part of the story that truly matters. Instead of receiving a helping hand or a moment of understanding, Aaron got a warning and a record. a permanent mark on a piece of paper that would follow him, a shadow he couldn't outrun. The officers who arrived on the scene didn't speak to him like a child who had made a mistake out of desperation. They spoke to him like he was already a hardened criminal, a lost cause. "A kid like you," one of them said, the words sharp and cold. "You'll end up in jail soon." Those words, so carelessly thrown at a 12-year-old boy, didn't just sting. They burrowed deep into his mind. They became a prophecy, a label he couldn't peel off. And little by little, day by day, Aaron started to believe them. When people look at you and only see a criminal, you start to see one in the mirror too. It's a devastating cycle. This single event, this one moment of being hungry, set him on a path he never chose for himself. It shows how powerful our words are, and how easily a system meant to protect can end up pushing someone down. Think about it. What if the shopkeeper had offered him the food instead? What if the officers had connected him with a social worker or a food bank? A small act of compassion could have changed the entire trajectory of his life. Instead, the system saw a problem to be punished, not a person to be helped. And so, Aaron began his journey, not as a promising young boy, but as someone who was already expected to fail. He started to hang out with other kids who had been labeled the same way. It felt like they were the only ones who understood. They weren't bad kids at heart. They were kids who had been told, over and over, that they were. By 14, Aaron had been picked up by the police a few more times. Minor offenses, loitering, petty shoplifting with his new friends. Each time, the response was the same. More warnings, more entries on his record, more officers reminding him of the future they had already predicted for him. The phrase "kid like you" echoed in his ears. It became his identity. He stopped trying in school. Why bother, when everyone already knew where he was headed? His teachers saw him as a troublemaker. His neighbors saw him as a threat. The prophecy was fulfilling itself, not because it was true, but because enough people believed it to be. He started to internalize the label. If everyone was going to treat him like a criminal, maybe that's what he was. It was a twisted form of acceptance. It was easier to lean into the role everyone had assigned him than to constantly fight against it. The world had drawn a box around him, and it was getting harder and harder to see a way out. This is a common story, one that plays out in countless communities. Young people, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds, are funneled into the justice system for mistakes that others might get a second chance for. At 16, Aaron was arrested for being the lookout during a botched robbery. He didn't go inside, he didn't hurt anyone, but he was there. And this time, it wasn't just a warning. This time, he was sent to a juvenile detention center, the place they said he'd end up. Inside, he was surrounded by others who had similar stories. Kids who were hungry, scared, or just looking for a place to belong, who were now caught in the gears of the system. The detention center wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about punishment. It hardened him. The softness of the 12-year-old boy who just wanted a bag of chips was gone, replaced by a defensive shell. He learned the rules of survival in that place. Don't show weakness. Don't trust anyone. He came out more disconnected from society than when he went in. He had a criminal record that made it nearly impossible to find a job. The doors that were already closing on him were now firmly shut and locked. The prophecy was complete. Aaron had become what they told him he would become. But is that his failure, or ours? This story isn't just about Aaron. It's about the countless Aarons out there. It's a powerful reminder of the impact of our words and our systems. When we label a child, we are not predicting their future. We are often creating it. We are handing them a script and expecting them to play the part. But what if we changed the script? What if we responded to a child's cry for help, even if it looks like a mistake, with compassion instead of condemnation? What if we invested in communities, in schools, in mental health support, instead of just in punishment? Imagine a different reality for Aaron, one where the shopkeeper recognizes his hunger and gives him the food, maybe even talks to him, one where the police officers see a child in need and connect his family with resources. In that reality, Aaron might have finished school. He might have discovered a passion, found a career, built a life for himself. He wouldn't be defined by his worst moment at 12 years old. That's the world we should be striving to create. A world where a mistake is a lesson, not a life sentence. It's easy to look at someone like Aaron and judge them. But we need to look deeper. We need to look at the systems and the attitudes that shape their journey. We need to ask ourselves if we are part of the problem or part of the solution. Every interaction matters. Every word has weight. The story of Aaron is a tragedy, but it doesn't have to be the only story. We have the power to write different endings for the kids who come after him. It starts with empathy. It starts with seeing the hungry child, not the thief. We often talk about personal responsibility, and that's important, but we also need to talk about collective responsibility. As a society, we have a responsibility to create an environment where children can thrive, where they can make mistakes and learn from them without being permanently branded. Aaron's story is a call to action. Let's challenge our own biases. Let's advocate for systems that rehabilitate instead of just punish. Let's be the person who offers a hand up, not the one who pushes someone further down. For anyone who feels like they've been labeled or feel lost in the system, please know that your story isn't over. There are people and organizations that want to help you rewrite your script. Resources for youth support, legal aid, and mental health services are available. You can find links in the description below. Seeking help is a sign of incredible strength. You are more than the labels others have given you. Aaron's journey began with a simple act of hunger, but it was shaped by the reactions of the world around him. His story is a heartbreaking illustration of how a child's potential can be crushed under the weight of negative expectations. Let's learn from it. Let's work towards a future where every child is seen for their potential, not for their mistakes. A future where a cry for help is met with compassion, not a cage. At 13, Aaron found the older boys in the neighborhood. You know the type, the ones everyone's parents told them to avoid. They had bikes that looked a bit too new, pockets full of cash they never seemed to work for, and a swaggering confidence that made the world seem to part for them. They were a tight-knit crew, a pack, and to a kid like Aaron, who felt invisible most of the time, they were magnetic. They took him in. For the first time, Aaron felt like he had a family, a real one. They didn't care about his grades or where his parents were. They just saw him. They clapped him on the back, shared their food, and called him little brother. This feeling, this sense of belonging, was like a drug. It was something he never knew he was missing until he had it, and once he did, he couldn't imagine living without it. They taught him things, but not the kind of things you learn in a classroom. They taught him how to survive on the streets. Their streets. It started small. How to spot an easy target. How to distract someone just long enough to snatch a phone from their hand. Aaron's heart would pound in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. But when he'd come back, breathless, phone in hand, the older boys would cheer. That praise was intoxicating. It drowned out the guilt, the shame, the little voice inside him screaming that this was wrong. Soon, the lessons escalated. They taught him how to slip into empty houses, how to move like a ghost through rooms that weren't his, looking for anything valuable. The silence of those houses was deafening, filled with the ghosts of the families who lived there. He'd see family photos on the mantelpiece, kids' drawings on the fridge, and a wave of nausea would hit him. This wasn't just an empty house, it was a home. But the thought of going back to the crew, empty-handed, was even more terrifying than getting caught. They taught him the most important lesson of all: how to act tough, especially when you're scared to death. How to puff out your chest, lower your voice, and meet someone's gaze without flinching, even when your insides are twisting into knots. He learned that on the street. Fear was a weakness, and weakness got you hurt. So he built a wall around himself, brick by brick, until the scared 13-year-old boy was hidden so deep inside that sometimes even he couldn't find him. He wore the toughness like a mask, and after a while, the mask started to feel like his own face. Deep down, Aaron didn't want to be like them. He didn't want the cold knot of fear in his stomach to be his constant companion. He didn't want to see the flicker of terror in someone's eyes when he approached them. He saw the dead-end future they were all heading towards, a cycle of courts, probation, and maybe worse. But the need to belong, to be seen, to be part of something, was a powerful current pulling him under. He was treading water, and they were the only life raft in sight, even if it was heading for a waterfall. His name became a file, a collection of reports and incidents. He was no longer Aaron, he was a problem. At school, it was a similar story. Teachers who once tried to help now just sighed when he walked into class late, if he showed up at all. His desk at the back of the room became his own deserted island. He'd sit there, head down, the lessons washing over him like a language he no longer understood. The invitations to join school clubs stopped. The concerned phone calls home stopped. Eventually, the schools themselves stopped trying. He was passed from one to another, each one pushing him further to the margins, until he fell off the edge completely. Social workers entered the picture, with their clipboards and their serious faces. They mapped out his pattern of behavior and predicted his trajectory. They talked about him like he was a weather pattern or a stock market trend, something to be analyzed and predicted, but not understood. They saw the what, but they never bothered to look for the why. No one asked him. No one ever just sat down and asked, "Aaron, why are you doing this?" No one asked him if he was scared. No one asked him if he was lonely. No one asked him what it was like to go home to an empty house where the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. No one asked him what it felt like to be 13 and feel like the whole world had already given up on you. If they had asked, maybe he would have told them. He might have told them about the gnawing emptiness that the older boys filled with their rough camaraderie. He might have told them that stealing a phone wasn't about the money. It was about the moment of validation he got from the only people who seemed to care if he succeeded at anything. He might have told them that acting tough was just a desperate attempt to protect the small, breakable part of himself that was still just a kid who wanted his mom and dad. But no one asked, so Aaron kept quiet, and the wall around him grew taller and thicker. The tough guy mask stayed on, and the angry, scared 13-year-old boy stayed hidden. He was just another high-risk kid, another statistic in the making. Lost in a system that was great at labeling him but terrible at listening. He was screaming for help in a language no one around him seemed to speak. A silent shout in a world that wasn't paying attention. He was just a boy who wanted to belong, and he'd found the only place that would have him, at a cost that was becoming clearer with every passing day. And he was terrified that it was already too late to find his way back. One wrong turn, one bad decision, that ended up defining a huge part of your life. Today, I want to tell you a story about a young man named Aaron, and how one single night when he was 15 changed everything for him. Aaron was a pretty typical 15-year-old. He had his group of friends, he was trying to figure out who he was, and like a lot of kids his age, he sometimes found himself in situations he shouldn't have been in. He wasn't a bad kid, not by a long shot. He was just a kid. But one night, being with the wrong crowd at the wrong time led to a moment that would haunt him for years. The plan seemed simple, almost like a dare. The older boys in his group wanted to break into a house they were sure was empty. They'd been watching it for a while. No lights on, mail piling up. He stayed near the entry point, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Aaron saw the whole thing happen. He hadn't moved. He hadn't laid a finger on the man. He hadn't even been close to him. All he had done was stand there, watching the nightmare unfold. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The other boys managed to scramble out the window and disappear into the night. But Aaron was too stunned to move. When the police burst through the door, they found him standing in the living room, a deer in the headlights, with the injured homeowner groaning on the floor. The hardest part was the phone call. The hardest part was seeing his mother's face when she arrived. It was a look of heartbreak, of fear, of a world turned upside down. It was more painful than any punishment the court could deliver. In that moment, he understood the true weight of his actions. It wasn't just about breaking a law, it was about breaking his mother's heart. The legal process was long and grueling. Because of the injury to the homeowner, the charges were serious. Aaron was facing significant consequences that could derail his entire future. He was expelled from school. His so-called friends distanced themselves, each one trying to save their own skin. He felt completely and utterly alone, trapped in a mess of his own making. This was Aaron's rock bottom. A 15-year-old kid branded a criminal, his future uncertain, and the person he loved most in the world devastated by his choices. It would have been so easy for him to give up, to accept this new label, to let this one mistake define the rest of his life. It would have been easy to fall deeper into a world of trouble. But Aaron didn't. Something shifted in him that night. He saw his mother cry. He realized he had a choice. He chose the latter. It wasn't an easy path. It was a daily struggle against shame, regret, and the judgment of others. If you're rewatching this and you feel like UVA made a mistake, UQIN come back from I want you to think of Aaron. His journey from that dark house to a life of purpose shows that redemption is possible. It takes courage, it takes work, and it takes a refusal to be defined by your past. It wasn't about the stuff he took, it was about feeling something, anything, other than invisible. Every single time he came out, the cold steel doors clanging shut behind him, he made a promise. Not to his parents, not to a parole officer, but to himself. A deep, solemn vow whispered into the cold morning air. This time, he would change. This time, it would be different. We're not hiring, they'd say, their eyes glancing over him, making a judgment before he even spoke a word. Or worse, the interview would go well. He'd feel a flicker of that fragile hope. And then the question would come. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? The moment he checked that box, he could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The friendly smiles would tighten, the open posture would close. But the doors of education were just as closed as the doors of employment. We have concerns about your disciplinary record, the administrators would say. He wasn't actively choosing a life of crime. It felt more like a life of crime was the only option left on the table. Imagine feeling like you're screaming in a soundproof room. That was Aaron's reality. The frustration built up inside him, a pressure cooker with no release valve. He wanted to be good, he wanted to make his family proud. The system that was supposed to rehabilitate him had instead branded him, making it nearly impossible to reintegrate. It was a paradox he lived every day. He was told to change, but was denied all the tools necessary for that change. I hope you'll see the human being behind the record, a person who, like all of us, is looking for a place to belong, a chance to prove their worth, and a reason to hope. Change is possible, but it requires empathy, opportunity, and a belief in the power of a second chance. At 17, Aaron made the biggest mistake of his life. His group stole a car to impress an older gang. During the chase, the car crashed into a parked vehicle. No one was hurt, but the damage was heavy. This time, the police had enough. The judge had enough. The system had enough. And because Aaron had many previous offenses, the prosecutor pushed for adult charges. Serial offender. Dangerous to society. Beyond saving. But no one asked what made a child end up like this. No one looked at the home he came from, a place where the lights were often off and the fridge was usually empty. No one saw the bruises, not just on his skin, but on his spirit, left by a father who used his fists more than his words. No one heard the whispers in the school hallways, the taunts that called him stupid and slow because he struggled to read, a difficulty no one ever bothered to diagnose as dyslexia. So Aaron found his family elsewhere. He found it on the street corners, with other kids just as lost and invisible as he was. They offered him a sense of belonging he'd never known, a twisted form of validation he craved. The older gang members, they seemed like kings. They had respect, they had money, they had power. For a kid who had nothing, that was everything. Stealing a car wasn't just a joyride. It was a desperate audition. It was a plea to be seen, to be someone. The system labeled Aaron a criminal, a lost cause. But what is a criminal? Is it someone who breaks the law, or is it someone the system has broken first? Aaron's story isn't unique. Thousands of kids just like him fall through the cracks every single day. They are born into poverty, neglect, and violence. Their schools are underfunded, their communities are underserved, and their futures seem predetermined before they even learn to dream. They act out, they make mistakes, they break the law. And we, as a society, are quick to judge. We see the crime, but we don't see the context. We see the bad kid, but we ignore the bad circumstances that shaped him. We build more prisons instead of better schools. We invest in punishment instead of prevention. Let's rewind. What if, when Aaron was 7 and struggling to read, a teacher had noticed? What if he'd been given a tutor? Someone patient who could show him that letters weren't his enemy. Imagine him discovering the magic of books, worlds opening up to him. His confidence would have soared. He would have seen a future beyond the bleak reality of his neighborhood. What if, when he was 12 and showing up to school with unexplained bruises, a counselor had intervened? What if there had been a safe place for him to go, a support system for his family to get the help they desperately needed? He might have learned that love doesn't have to hurt, that a home can be a sanctuary, not a battleground. And what if, when he was 15 and first got into trouble for shoplifting, he hadn't just been given a slap on the wrist and sent back to the same environment? What if he had been connected with a mentor, someone who had walked a similar path and found a way out, someone to show him that his worth was untempered by the brand of sneakers on his feet or the respect of a gang? These aren't fantasies, these are interventions. These are the points where the trajectory of a life can be changed. But they require investment. They require a shift in our perspective, from punishment to rehabilitation, from judgment to empathy. When we look at a kid like Aaron, we need to ask why, not just what. Why is he acting out? Why is he seeking validation in dangerous places? What pain is he trying to escape? When we only focus on the crime, we're just trimming the weeds. We're not pulling out the root. And the root is almost always a complex tangle of trauma, poverty, and systemic failure. The prosecutor called Aaron beyond saving. Think about that phrase. At 17, before his brain was even fully developed. Before he had a chance to truly understand the consequences of his actions or imagine a different life for himself. To declare a child beyond saving is to give up on them. It's the ultimate failure of the adult world. It's easier, of course. It is easier to lock a kid up and throw away the key than it is to address the messy, complicated problems that led him there. It's cheaper, in the short term, to build a jail cell than it is to fund a community center, a mental health clinic, and a job training program. But what is the long-term cost? The cost is a generation of lost potential. It's the perpetuation of a cycle of crime and poverty that traps families for decades. When we send a teenager like Aaron into the adult prison system, what do we think will happen? He goes in as a scared, misguided kid and comes out a hardened adult, educated in the ways of a system that thrives on violence and despair. His criminal record becomes a life sentence, barring him from jobs, housing, and the chance to ever become a contributing member of society. We don't save society by doing this. We create a permanent underclass, reinforcing the very problems we claim to be solving. We spend billions on incarceration, a reactive measure, while skimping on the proactive solutions that could prevent these tragedies in the first place. The narrative of the superpredator, the irredeemable teen, was a myth created in the 90s that did immense damage. It justified harsher sentences and led to a generation of kids being treated as adults by the justice system. But neuroscience and psychology have shown us what common sense should have told us all along. Teenagers are not tiny adults. Their brains are still developing, particularly the parts responsible for impulse control, planning, and understanding long-term consequences. They are uniquely susceptible to peer pressure and are more capable of change and rehabilitation than adults. To ignore this science is not just unjust, it's counterproductive. So, what's the alternative? It's called restorative justice. It's about healing, not just punishing. It brings the offender, the victim, and the community together to address the harm that was done. Instead of just asking what law was broken, it asks who was harmed and what needs to be done to make things right. It forces a young person like Aaron to face the real-world consequences of his actions, to understand the fear and loss he caused, not just to the car owner, but to the community's sense of safety. It's about accountability, but it's also about reintegration. It's about giving him a chance to repair the harm and, in doing so, repair a piece of himself. Programs focused on education, job training, and therapy within the juvenile system have shown incredible success. When we invest in a young person's future, they start to invest in it too. When we show them a path forward, they are more likely to take it. It's not about being soft on crime, it's about being smart on crime. It's about recognizing that every child we throw away is a massive loss to all of us. He could have been an artist, a mechanic, an entrepreneur, a father. He could have been a force for good. Aaron's story is a call to action. It's a challenge to every one of us. The next time you hear about a teenager involved in a crime, pause for a moment before you judge. Ask yourself about the story you're not hearing. Ask yourself about the system that failed them long before they failed themselves. We need to demand more from our leaders, our communities, and our justice system. We need to advocate for policies that invest in children from the very beginning. Early childhood education, mental health support in schools, after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, and a justice system that prioritizes rehabilitation over retribution. Change begins with a shift in our collective mindset. It begins with empathy. It begins with recognizing the humanity in every child, no matter their mistakes. Aaron was not born a criminal. He was a child who was failed at every turn. His story could have been different, and the stories of countless others still can be. Let's be the ones who care enough to ask why. Let's be the ones who refuse to accept that any child is beyond saving. Because when we save a child, we're not just saving one life. We are investing in a safer, more just, and more compassionate future for everyone. In the courtroom, Aaron didn't cry. He didn't plead for mercy or understanding. He just sat there, his head bowed, a silent statue of despair. It was as if he'd lost all hope, not just for today, but for every tomorrow that might have been. The air in the room was thick with tension, each tick of the clock amplifying the dread. The judge, a stern-faced man with tired eyes, began to read from a file. He spoke slowly, deliberately, and each line of Aaron's record seemed to add another layer of weight to the already suffocating atmosphere. For Aaron, it was the beginning of an even longer one. But Aaron himself, he didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He simply closed his eyes, shutting out the courtroom, the gasps, his mother's silent pain. In that moment of darkness, a strange sense of calm washed over him. It wasn't acceptance, not really. It was resignation. He'd always believed that the world had never truly expected him to grow old as a free man. This verdict wasn't a surprise. It was a prophecy fulfilled. His story began on a street corner, not much different from any other in the city's forgotten neighborhoods. He was a kid with bright eyes and a quick laugh, but the world around him was gray and unforgiving. His father was a ghost, a name whispered in hushed tones, gone long before Aaron could form a memory of him. His mother worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, her hands raw and her face etched with a permanent exhaustion. She loved him fiercely, but love couldn't fill an empty stomach or buy new shoes. So, Aaron learned to fend for himself. He started small, running errands for the older guys on the block. They liked his speed and his silence. He learned to watch, to listen, to understand the unspoken rules of the street. He learned that respect was a currency more valuable than cash, and fear was its closest cousin. School became a blur of teachers whose names he could unremember and lessons that felt disconnected from his reality. His real education happened on the pavement, under the dim glow of streetlights. His first arrest came when he was 13. He was a lookout for a petty theft. He got caught, the others didn't. In juvenile hall, he learned a new set of rules. He learned to make himself smaller, to be invisible, but also to show no weakness. When he got out, he was different. The childish laughter was gone, replaced by a guarded watchfulness. The world now saw him not as a kid who made a mistake, but as a problem, a delinquent. The label stuck to him like tar. As a teenager, the stakes got higher. The errands became more dangerous. The small thefts grew into bigger ones. He fell in with a crew, not because he particularly liked them, but because there was a strange safety in numbers. They offered a sense of belonging that he couldn't find anywhere else. They were a fractured, dysfunctional family, bound together by shared risks and a common enemy, the system that seemed determined to crush them. He tried to get out. He really did. There was a time he got a job washing dishes at a diner. He worked hard, showing up early, leaving late. For a few weeks he felt a flicker of hope. He imagined a different life, one where he could walk down the street without looking over his shoulder. But then his boss found out about his record. The next day, he was told his services were no longer needed. The door to that other life had slammed shut in his face. That rejection sent him spiraling back to the only world that would have him. The anger and resentment festered. It felt like he was playing a game where the rules were rigged against him from the start. Every time he tried to play by the book was thrown at his head. So, he stopped trying. He embraced the role that society had assigned him. If they were going to see him as a criminal, he would be the best one he could be. The years that followed were a blur of adrenaline and fear, of close calls and long nights spent hiding. He rose through the ranks of his small-time crew. He wasn't a leader, not by nature, but he was reliable and smart. He saw angles others missed, but with every step up that ladder, the ground beneath him became less stable. He saw friends go to prison, or worse. He carried the weight of their absence, a constant reminder of the price of the life he was living. When the police sirens wailed in the distance, he knew it was over. There was no running this time. The trial was a spectacle. The media painted him as a monster, a hardened criminal, the mastermind behind it all. They didn't talk about the kid who loved to draw, the teenager who got fired from his dishwashing job, the young man who just wanted a chance. They told a simple story, because simple stories are easier to sell. And in the courtroom, that simple story became the official truth. His lawyer, a tired public defender with too many cases, tried his best. He argued about circumstances, about lack of opportunity, about a system that fails boys like Aaron from the day they are born. But his words were like whispers in a hurricane. They were drowned out by the prosecution's thunderous narrative of crime and punishment. Now, sitting in the silence of the courtroom, Aaron thought about his mother. He thought about her weary face, her chapped hands, the endless sacrifices she had made. He had wanted to give her a better life, to buy her a small house with a garden. Instead, he had given her this, a public humiliation, a lifetime of visiting days behind plexiglass. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that was far heavier than any prison sentence. He didn't know what the next 35 years would look like. He imagined a world of concrete and steel, of clanging doors and shouted orders, a world where time moves differently, stretching and compressing until days, weeks, and years blur into one another. He would become a number, a ghost in the machine. As the guards came to lead him away, he finally lifted his head. He scanned the crowd, his eyes finding his mother's. Her face was a mask of grief, tears streaming down her cheeks. But through the tears, he saw something else. The same fierce, unconditional love that had been there from the beginning. They had taken his freedom, they had taken his future, but they could not take the memory of that love. And maybe, just maybe, in the desolate landscape of the years to come, that would be enough to keep him from losing himself completely. The world may have never expected him to grow old outside of a prison, but he would survive. He had to, for her. a child who desperately needed help but only received punishment. Let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, before the labels, before the statistics. Picture a small boy, maybe with scraped knees and a curious mind. Like any child, he was a sponge, soaking up the world around him. He was screaming for attention, for someone to notice he was drowning. But the system isn't set up to interpret these signals. It's set up to punish the behavior. So, the first crack appeared. Instead of a counselor, he got detention. Instead of someone asking what happened to you, they asked what's wrong with you. The message he received was clear: you are the problem. He was a child who needed a hand to hold, but instead, he was pushed away. As he grew, the small cracks became gaping chasms. He looked for a family, for a sense of belonging, and he found it in the only places that would accept him on the streets, with others who had also been discarded. This wasn't a conscious choice to embrace a life of crime. In this new family, the rules were different. The guidance he received wasn't about building a future, it was about surviving the present. The love he got was conditional, tangled up in loyalty to a code that led him further down the wrong path. He learned a new set of skills not for a career, but for the streets. People judged him for the company he kept. "You are who you surround yourself with," they'd quote. But what happens when the only people who will surround you are the ones who have also fallen through the cracks? He was looking for guidance, and this was the only guidance available. He learned to be tough because vulnerability meant being a target. He learned to take what he needed because no one was ever going to give it to him. We ask why he didn't just get a job or straighten up. Imagine trying to fill out a job application when you've never been taught basic literacy or social skills. Imagine trying to interview for a position when your entire nervous system is screaming that everyone is a threat. Imagine trying to hold down a 9-to-5 when you're battling trauma, addiction, or mental health issues that have never once been addressed. It's like asking someone with 2 broken legs to run a marathon. It's not a matter of willpower, it's a matter of capability and support. The system that was supposed to be a safety net, schools, social services, the justice system, became a web that trapped him. Each interaction reinforced the narrative that he was worthless, that he was beyond saving. School suspended him, pushing him further toward the streets. Social services was a revolving door of overworked case managers and paperwork. And the justice system. It saw a nail and brought out a hammer. He needed rehabilitation, but he got incarceration. He needed therapy, but he got a prison sentence. In prison, he wasn't taught how to reintegrate into society. He was taught how to be a better criminal. He was surrounded by more trauma, more violence, more hopelessness. He went in as a young man who had made mistakes and came out as a hardened adult with fewer options and more scars, both visible and invisible. Loneliness was his constant companion. The kind of loneliness that eats you from the inside out. It's the feeling of being invisible in a world full of people. He needed love, the unconditional love that says, "I see you, I value you, even with your flaws." But all he got was conditional acceptance or outright rejection. He was a ghost in his own life story, a character written off by everyone who was supposed to care. So, when we look at the story of Aaron, we have a choice. We can see him as the world saw him, a criminal, a failure, a monster, a problem to be managed, or we can choose to see the full picture. We can see the child who has failed at every turn. We can see the desperate search for connection that was twisted into something destructive. We can see a human being crying out for help in the only ways he knew how. Aaron's story isn't just about him, it's about us. It's a mirror reflecting the cracks in our own society. How many other Aarons are out there right now? How many children are being labeled bad when they're actually just sad, scared, and unsupported? The solution isn't simple, but it starts with a shift in perspective. It starts with empathy. It starts with asking what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. It means investing in early intervention, in mental health support in schools, in community programs that provide mentorship and a sense of belonging. It means reforming our justice system from a place of punishment to one of genuine rehabilitation. It means we must be the ones to show them how to change. We must be the ones to offer the guidance, the support, and the unconditional love they were denied. We have to be the ones to stand in the gap and become the safety net that catches them when they fall. They are made by neglect, by abuse, by apathy, by a society that looks away.